Welcome to New Tracks Workshop. My name is Jim Kello. I'm the creator and host for New Tracks, where mentors help modelers build. Thanks so much for coming. I hope you come back often and tell your friends about our show. These Saturday workshops are a new project for New Tracks. They've resulted from comments I've received from modelers about Scratchbuilding and Chris Blackmar's interest in producing and leading this effort. The segments are structured like the popular build-along segments on our Wednesday evening shows, except these Saturday shows are designed to show modelers how to scratch build a model. I personally believe that scratch building is one of the most creative parts of model railroading, and I think you'll agree if you try it. Here is your opportunity to work with some skilled modelers to learn how to do it. You will learn the steps, the skills, the techniques involved in scratch building a model in any scale you want. There are no kits to buy, only the needed scratch building supplies. The plans that will be used for the model, you can download on your computer at no cost. The show's moderator, Chris Blackmar, is a very talented and artistic modeler, and he and his guest will guide you through the complete scratch building process, one small step at a time. After all, that's what mentoring is all about. If you're a beginner, I hope you'll join in and experience the thrill of completing a scratch-built model and being able to stand back and say, I built that. If you're a more experienced or advanced modeler, I hope you'll join in and offer your advice and knowledge to less skilled modelers, and even get some fresh ideas yourself. The live shows will, of course, be recorded on our YouTube channel, so you can refer to the information later if you need to. In addition, I hope you'll visit our website, newtracksmodeling.com, and subscribe. You'll need to confirm the email that you received to verify your address. And after that, you'll receive all of the notice of our future shows, as well as the login links to attend. If you would prefer to watch the series on YouTube, you can do that by going to our channel, New Tracks Modeling, ring the bell, and click all. Therefore, you'll get all of the notice for the start of all of our future shows on the channel. If you can spare a little time, I hope you'll consider joining our management team to help us plan and produce any of our future shows. Please contact me at jimkello@newtracksmodeling.com, and let's discuss your interest. So welcome to the New Tracks Workshop. I look forward to seeing your finished models and, of course, hearing any suggestions for future shows you may have. Now, here is Chris Blackmar to start your scratch building journey.
All right, well, let's get this show going here. Welcome, everybody, and pull up your cup of coffee. In my case, it's some cream brulee from the County Door Coffee Company, or whatever else you may be drinking along with your project. And join us for the next couple of hours here of modeling. And today we're focused on coloring signs. Before we get going, I do want to have the invocation by Father Ron. He's not here today, so we do have a copy of the Modeler's Prayer, and we'll go on ahead and play that, and then we'll get this show going.
O God, as we express our creativity by creating in miniature the world around us, may we marvel at the beauty and genius which created the world and instilled in us a portion of your great knowledge and wisdom. Give success to the work of our hands, O God. Amen.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Father Ron. Woohoo! All right, everybody. see here. To begin with, I want to apologize. Apparently, we had the wrong time somehow posted on the YouTube notification. So if you come in late here, I apologize. It was our error. Sometimes we do make errors here. It's kind of confusing, quite frankly, because the YouTube stuff, when you set it up in the background, it goes by Pacific time instead of the standard that everybody's used to. And so we've just apparently snagged the wrong time window there. So please enjoy the show if you do come in late. For those of you that may just be joining us, again, I apologize for the confusion. To begin with, I wanted to ask if there's anybody out there who has any questions on their My Build project or any other project that they may be working on that some of the more advanced modelers here that are with us that they can give us some input on. For those of you in YouTube land, we do have a person moderating the YouTube chat. So he'll get the information over to us here on this live Zoom call. And while we're kind of waiting for anything to, any responses to that question, the other thing I wanted to ask is if there's anybody out there that would like to help us out on the back sides of this thing in running the show and a few things, we could really use the assistance. It does take more than just a couple of hands to keep this thing going. So anybody that would like to step up to the plate and volunteer a little bit of time, it would be more than appreciated. All right, so it doesn't look like there's any My Build questions or any other questions going on. So today's focus is going to be on weathering signs. This is installment 2 out of the 3 installments on signs. I decided to really break out the signs because they're really important in the whole story on the structure. So today we're going to focus on weathering the signs, and we're going to show you a few different tricks and a few different methodologies of coloring signs. And to begin with, I'm going to bring in Greg Cassidy. Now, Greg has a lot of experience with doing things online here. He has his own channel, which is very well done. But I'm going to go on ahead and turn this over to Greg and let him do a live demo on coloring some signs for you. And then I'll come back and offer an alternative. So Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Let me point out to you guys, I've done a lot of stuff online, but this is my first actual live demonstration. So we'll see what happens. What I'm going to show you is how I end up rusting signs. And because we're rusting them, what we're talking about today are metal signs. Obviously, there's all kinds of signs that you can put on your models. You can have painted on signs, and I know that's going to be a future topic. And you can have billboards and other signs that are painted on wood. The signs I'm going to be showing today are the metal signs that typically had been put on buildings for the last century. And I guess if nobody has any questions, we can go ahead and switch it over to my phone, and I will start showing you what I do. So I usually start with a number of printouts, and what I print out really depends on the building I'm going to be working on. If it's a gas station, I'll go for gas station signs. A general store, I'll try more general produce signs. And some kits come with signs in them, and sometimes I'll use them, but it really depends on, A, if they're printed very well. I've gotten some kits where the printing of the signs is really poor quality, even if it's a great kit. Or they may not be a sign that I particularly wanted on my building. I've sometimes made signs for my buildings. But once I print them out, I'll usually scale them to what size I want. And if it's going to be a metal sign that is going to be mounted on a building, I usually want it a little bit thicker than the standard bond that I print on. So one of the techniques that I'll do is, as shown with this, I'll take a second piece of paper, just cut it roughly the same size, and use some Elmer's glue. Just spread it on the back, and that way it gives me two thicknesses of the bond. And in most cases, I've found that that holds up so that once you glue it onto clapboard or board and batten or something like that, it'll hold its shape the way a metal sign would. You can use cardboard, but I've found sometimes that ends up being too thick, unless you're trying to show a sign that's actually mounted on a wood backing or something. And if you just use a single sheet of paper, it does run the risk of maybe curling where it's not actually glued to the siding, you know, if you have clapboard or something. So I like going with two sheets of paper, and it's just what tends to work for me. Once I have it glued together, and I didn't with these because I'm just going to show the demonstration, I'll decide if I want to do the rusting and the weathering of the signs on the sheet of paper, or if I want to cut it out first. I always find it easier to do it on the sheet of paper if I can, but sometimes I won't. If I have a printout like this, and if I wanted to rust this sign, but I want to save a couple others for some other time, then I'm more likely to cut it out first. But on a sheet like this, where I have a lot of room around the signs, I can go ahead and rust those in place. So once I pick the sign I'm going to work on, and we'll go ahead and take this Sinclair sign right here. I usually pick a couple of colors. For most of the rusting, I'll just use craft paints, and I tend to use burnt umber, burnt sienna, and raw umber. They give me a dark and a medium and a light. Sometimes I'll use a type of Vallejo paint, or for some rusting effects, I'll use an AK. The hull red and saddle brown are really good together. They give a kind of a dark rust and a light rust. But mostly for signs, if I'm going to be using a sponging on technique, I'll stick with my craft paints. I know what shades I'm going to get and how I'm going to use them. So I'll first start with the lighter color, which is going to be burnt sienna. And I'll put a little dab on a palette. Now, I tend to use old coffee lids for palettes. I also use them for glue palettes. And then I have a bundle of sponges here. Now, these are all just cut from one of those large grout sponges that you can get at Home Depot. I do have some what are called artist sponges as well, which are pretty similar. And then I've also got in there some natural sponge and stuff. Mostly what you're going for is something that has a whole bunch of little imperfections in it. And that's why I'll take one of these and tear it apart. And you're trying to get where you have a lot of those imperfections. Those are what you're going after. And here's why. I've seen some people use tweezers to do this. I just roll it up in my finger so that I've got a little bit of a ball with all the imperfections out like that. I'll dip it in my color. And then just like dry brushing, I'll try to unload most of the paint off of it. what I'm going for is where I finally get it to where I'm getting tiny little impressions. And then that's what I'll start applying to the sign. Now, for my light colors, I usually tend to go over the whole sign, and that gives just a sort of impression of a background rust on the entire sign. Then I'll move on to one of my darker colors. I'll put a little bit in the palette. And if I've unloaded my sponge, then I can use the same one. Sometimes if I've used it a couple of times, I'll move on to a new one. And again, I've just got the dark color on there, and I'll tap most of it off. And the dark colors, I'll start going around the outer edges of it, where you might get some more rust building up. Rust on signs usually tends to move from the outside in as the enamel paint kind of wears away. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have big rust spots here and there, but for most of my signs, that's how I'll tend to do it. And then if I want to, and especially if it's a larger sign, I'll use one of my darkest browns. In this case, it's raw umber. And I'll try to get a really fine point of paint on it, and then unload all of that, and maybe try and hit one or two spots where it's just a little more rusty there for some reason. It might be on the edge, or on a bigger sign, it might be on part of the sign. And then this is what it'll come out looking like. Let me turn it right side up there. And something like that. Now, I can show you here what doing that same technique did on this sign on this kit. And that Sinclair sign right there, I did the same way. Now, once I've got it rusted to the point I want it, I'll go ahead and cut it out. You can use a new X-Acto blade for that. You want to use something sharp. I got turned on to these scalpels, and when I'm going to be doing something where I need a really sharp blade, that's what I'll end up using. And depending on the sign, I'll very often use a straight edge if I have a lot of straight corners that I need to go to and from. But on a sign like this, where we've got a lot of bends, I can sometimes feel comfortable cutting it out freehand. And again, it depends on the size of the sign you're doing and the border on the sign. So once I have it cut out, and typically this would be mounted on a separate sheet of bond so that it would have twice its thickness. One of the things that really stands out real easily on a sign like this, once it's mounted on a building, is a white edge. And I have two different ways that I deal with that. A quick and easy way is to use some type of marker. You could use a Sharpie, or there are some other types of markers. And if you go along the edge, it'll hide that white edge. And let me see if I can show that. One of the cautions I'm going to give is sometimes, depending on the bond you're using, this can actually bleed into the sign. And you might see that. Sometimes I'll use a brown one. That gives the appearance that the edge is actually rusting. So one of the other things that I'll sometimes do, if I want to make sure I avoid that, is I'll just use a little bit of black craft paint. Actually, for this, I usually just, after shaking it, unscrew the cap. And then I'll get a very fine paintbrush. In this case, it's a 20-0. And put a little bit on. And I'll just go right along the edge. And I always make sure I'm doing it from the back of the sign, because if your brush slips, it'll be marking the back and not the front of the sign. And this is a little more tedious, but it removes the risk of anything bleeding onto the sign that the marker gives you. And then when I go to attach my signs, in a case like a building like this, I'll just tend to use canopy glue, something like that. A white Elmer's glue would tend to work. And you don't need to get it very wet. You don't want it to kind of warp or wrinkle or anything like that. But these are all just signs that I did that same rusting effect on. And then once I get them mounted, I'll do some more rust appearance to them in relation to the wall. And I think that's something we're going to talk about later. So I think that's it for my demonstration. Are there any questions about anything that I've done? You know, it's not a new technique. I've learned it from watching YouTube's Jason Jensen and some other people. It's a fairly simple technique, and it's very similar to the type of sponging you can do for weathering wood. Basically, you're just trying to get the sponge to where you're using a lot of those little irregularities for putting lots of tiny little spots and impressions on the sign. So I guess that's it, Chris.
Okay, well, outstanding. Thank you very much for participating here on this. It's a little bit different, as you noticed, from a pre-recording to doing it live, but the big thing is to go on ahead and enjoy the process. Does anybody, again, have any questions on Greg's technique here or anything?
And I'll be here all night, so.
Okay.
I have one question, Chris. I
Uh-huh.
noticed Greg said he used the Elmer's glue, but he didn't say anything that it was rubber cement. It's rubber cement glue that he uses.
Oh, for attaching the two sheets of paper together.
Yes.
Yes, it's Elmer's rubber cement. Now any contact cement will work. I have another bottle of contact cement that I've also used. I think it was DAP, and I just ran out of it. But basically, a paper contact cement is all I use.
So regular glue won't work very well, is what you're saying.
I think it introduces more than you need because regular glue has more moisture in it, and the rubber cement, contact cement, it basically doesn't introduce any moisture into the paper.
Okay. Yep. Good. Thank you.
Helps prevent the bleeding from the backside of the
Right on.
ink. Yeah. So, which I know Pat is familiar with, so he's a very advanced modeler here.
Oh, now.
So anyway, all right. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of a variation on what was just shown by Greg here. You know, in modeling, there's 88 different ways to skin the cat.
Yep.
And so, again, I wanted to go back and note that these are the kind of metal signs. If you go back to last week's show, we had a protracted discussion about sign types and when to use them, and a few variables in their use about mounting them, and just some basic weathering processes for them, and some basic tips and techniques. So this section here that Greg just presented and what I'm going to present is actually building on last week's presentation. So if you have not seen last week's presentation, I do encourage you to visit YouTube land and watch that show. So with that, I'm going to go on ahead and move my computer as I always do. And Will, if you can go on ahead and flip it over to my desktop. And Rich, did we have anything come through on YouTube yet?
It's been very quiet.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, as Greg noted, I've got some printouts here. I typically get the sheets and I'll do 4 or 5 sheets at a time. One of the things that I tend to do when I do the printing here is I tend to print them on kind of a gloss paper, a better quality gloss paper. That will help give you some glossiness to the sign. You know, particularly if you're not going to do a whole lot of weathering to it. But I'll come back and address these signs. Remember, these were porcelain signs, a lot of them that we're talking about here. But even a metal sign, if it's just a straight metal sign, like a license plate, it's still got a reflective property to it. So we can all think about that. So I oftentimes will take them down to some place and get on a better quality type of a printer, and I get them printed out in different scales, because signs are something that go across scales. And so here I'm actually working on some O scale signs, and the first thing I did was to apply the sign to a backer. Now, like Greg said, he uses another piece of paper. You have to think about scale. Again, these are O scale signs, but I'm going to go on ahead and weather one and probably use it on my structure. So the first thing I did, of course, was put it onto a backing paper. Now, typically I will use a business card for smaller signs. You know, if I've got just a small section, I'll just use an old business card. Otherwise, I'll go on ahead and put them on something else. I do sometimes use a plate, an artist's plate, about a 80 to 120 pound artist plates. That comes out to be about the same thickness as the business cards. The other thing that you can utilize for full sheets, if you want, is something like old manila folders. So I just grabbed an old manila folder that I was going to trash, and I went through and applied the sign to this. Now, the way I applied it, instead of using Greg's technique, I used some 3N Super 77 adhesive spray. This is kind of my preferred way of doing large signs or sheets of signs to apply something. And so I went on ahead and used the spray 77, and I just happen to have a brazier. Most guys do not have braziers. If you don't have one, you don't have to go out and buy one. It's not an essential tool, but it sure is nice if you've got one. So, you know, it just acts as a rolling pin, basically. Quite frankly, without the braziers, I have been known to go and get the rolling pin out of the kitchen. I use a marble rolling pin that you can refrigerate for baking and stuff, but it's nice and heavy and it works too. The side of your hand will always work, of course, or you can use some other round tools or even flat tools to get things kind of flat. The big trick is you want to get it kind of flat. So once we get it out and applied and dry, then we're going to go through and cut them out, in my case. Now, sometimes I will tell you that I just take a straight sheet at this point in time, and I'll just apply Mod Podge to it. 4 or 5 layers of Mod Podge with a good 2 or 3 days in between the applications to allow it to totally dry. That will really add to the sign and give you a very high gloss finish to the sign. And again, that's for kind of a newer sign if you don't want to really weather it, or you come back with just a bit of pastel weathering later on once the sign is kind of mounted. But if we're going to do a more heavily weathered sign, I'll go through and apply the weathering process. Before I go very far though, here's a sign that has the, I'm trying to get it to show the reflection. You can see that that sign has a reflection from the Mod Podge. So that's what Mod Podge
Looks good, Chris.
for you. So if you apply a Mod Podge thing, so the first step here is to go through and cut it out. So I'm just going to go through and make some basic cuts on this. This, quite frankly, is a little bit heavier paper than you would probably normally want to use, but I just kind of grabbed it because I know that in the future where I'm headed with this project that I'm actually going to want a thicker sign. So okay, and so now I've got the sign kind of cut out, and let me put this aside. All right, and so now I'm going to go through and just use a very sharp knife and a ruler, and I'm going to real quick go through and cut this thing out. And while I'm doing this, if some of the other guys out there can kind of tell us what they're working on and their projects are, that'd be wonderful. I'd like to hear what some of the other folks are working on. Come on, guys. Need your help here. Guys, don't strand me.
I enjoy what you're doing, Chris. Just keep going.
Yeah. Come on, guys. There's got to be somebody out there that's working on something that they're willing to share.
Chris, I'm not going to talk about the other project I'm on right now, but I do want to mention something to other guys about cutting out signs the way you're doing it. And my whole career has been in printing and pre-press. And for the last 40 years, part of my job was making proofs. And sometimes the proofs would just be a printed sheet that got sent out to the customer for approval. But if we had to make a proof of a brochure or a proof of a pocket folder or something like that, we had to go to our cutting table and cut the entire thing out, just as you are right now. And the one thing I learned very quickly was if you're cutting something, if you put the ruler over the object that you want to save, just like you're doing right now, if the blade wanders, it won't ruin what you're working on. As opposed to when you put the straight edge on the outside, if your blade wanders, you could ruin what you're working on and have to go back and remake it.
Right. Okay. Good point. Good point. Okay. I didn't get this as square as I normally would work on it, but I'm going to put a frame around this thing, so we'll square it up then. Okay. So we've got our sign here in front of us, And so I'm gonna take a pair of tweezers to kind of hold this puppy down. And I'm also gonna use a paper towel at this point, as kind of a back. That was my Mod Podge, or not Mod Podge, but my khaki glue I just caught with my elbow. So we all do that type of thing. All right, and so you can see this thing at this point in time. Now, as Greg noted, there's a bunch of different type of pens that you can utilize to color the edges of signs with. If you are really wanting to keep it fairly clean without bleeding, one of the tricks is to use a micron. That's a micron pen, and because the tip, where are you here? There you go. You can see that those tips are really, really fine and stuff. And you can run these tips along the edges of the sign. You have to be kind of careful and not to hold it a long time. And you will not get any bleeding using a micron type of a pen. The other option is to use more of the marker type pens. And you've got one of two things that you can do here. Number one, if you use the finer tip, it will, in a lot of cases, allow you to kind of roll it and you can control it. But the trick here is to do a fairly quick stroke. And if you do a fairly quick stroke from the back, you will not get that bleeding as heavily. But if you sit there and hold it and do it slow, as you can see, you'll get more bleeding. So that's one way to kind of weather the edges of the sign. But as you can see, you can get some bleeding that way. If you go to the broader tip, again, a quick stroke and you won't get as much bleeding. But if you do it slowly, it will bleed. So that's one of the other tricks of the trade here. Another trick of the trade, I'm going to go through and just for convenience sake, I'm just going to do this real quick, just on these edges. It's for the finished product, even though that will be underneath a edging of wood once we mount the thing. But the trick is that at this point in time, you can see that basically the coloring, I got a little piece of paper there, fuzz from the back from the cut, but you can see that the edges are weathered. The big point, like Greg noted, is to get rid of that white paper edge, because that will kill your models, particularly if you do any photography of them. You know, the camera's the greatest critic there is. So another way of doing this that a lot of people don't necessarily do is to take a gouache. Now, if you will recall, a gouache is nothing more than an opaque water paint. Basically, think of gouaches as opaque watercolors. And then I've also got a regular watercolor here in a tube. So I can use these to also weather my signs. Hang on a second, I'm gonna snag a drink of coffee. Green Brulee is really good coffee, guys. I'm gonna take this and first of all show you what you can kind of get with a burnt umber. Now, again, this is a gouache, so it's opaque. So I'm gonna take my toothpick. You guys can't see it, but I'm grabbing a business card off on the side. And let's see here. Try to get this in focus for everybody. So I'm going to take just a little bit of gouache and put it on the tip of my toothpick, and I'm going to go through and just start applying it this way. And that's going to give me a whole bunch of different like little dots, okay? And they're going to be kind of fine, which is exactly what I want. And then I'm also going to put a couple out just in a couple of other places here. And I'm going to kind of think about where, oops, that was quite a bit. Where our holes may have been for the signs. And then I'm also going to kind of just get a little bit more along the edges here. Okay. So real difficult. I used a ton of gouache, you know. It's like it's going to last me for 18 million years here. So,
Hey, Chris, one
as
thing
most you can.
I'm thinking with using the toothpick like that, if you are modeling holes where it's mounted and they're going to be rusty, that thing you could actually pull down, you know, in the direction of gravity. And a toothpick is really great for tiny little streaks like that.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're headed, Greg, quite frankly. The other thing that I'm going to show you here is if we've got a watercolor. Now remember, gouache is opaque, watercolor is transparent. So think about your materials, as I've been trying to teach all along. And this is a Indian red and it's just in an academy. So watercolor. If you guys buy watercolors, step up late and push and pay the few extra bucks and get yourself a decent watercolor. Do not buy the cheap watercolors for kids or for what are considered student grade. Go on ahead and get the professional grade. And I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put it right inside, just a little bit of a dot right inside a couple of the dots that I had made with the dark the darker gouache, and then that way it's going to give me a little bit of a different type of thing going, so that I can get that fade between, that fade between the actual rust, where you get the kind of dark color in the center and it fades out and gives you a kind of a faded color. So basically at this point in time, come on, where are we? Chink, 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 chink. There we go. So you can kind of see what I've kind of got going here. Okay. So that's kind of what the sign looks like at this point in time. Now, most people will at this point go and grab a round brush, you know, be it a number 2 like this one, or I think this one's a number 6. Wrong brush. Okay. You've heard me talk about the use of different kinds of brushes before. So there's 2 different types of brushes that you're going to want to use here. The first one would be a fan brush. Okay, and you guys can all see this, and that's what we're going to be using on this particular project. But another brush is called a rake. And you can see, there we go, that this brush has different holes or slots in the bristles. So by using the rake brush very lightly, it'll act much like a fan brush. But for today, I'm going to use a fan brush. Now, a fan brush. This one is a number 2. And you can see that it's a number 2, but wrong size brush. It's way too big for our purposes, particularly if I was working on an HO scale brush, or excuse me, an HO scale sign. So put away the large fan, and we're going to drop down in size to a different size fan brush. So you can see that these 2 fan brushes equal about the size of the number 2 that I have here. And both of these you can obtain from Micro Mart. This is a 12-aught and a 20-aught. Now, what's the difference besides a little bit of size? It also has to do with how these things will kind of separate once we get them wet. So I'm going to go on ahead and pull my water in here so you guys can see my water that I'm typically using. I got a little thing in here, so I'm going to pull it out right quick. So the first thing to do is to start getting your fan brush kind of prepared. And so that's with the first dip of water. So, and so I've got 2 more dips of water. And now I'm starting to get that rake coming out of the brush. So that's what you're after, is that rake. And you don't want the brush so big that it covers the entire sign. You want to be able to control your strokes a little bit here. So I'm going to hold down my sign, and I'm just going to start with a dry brush, basically, pulling down my weathering. And you do have to, as your brush continually gets wet and stuff, it gets more and more rakes in that fan brush. And kind of going down here to the gouache on the lower part, because I want to get it streaked.
Chris, how much working time do you have with those colors that you put on there?
Well, it depends on how thick you put them on, quite frankly. It's just a few minutes though, because it is a watercolor and it does tend to dry the gouache. So I'm working with watercolors, but you can see the effects that one can kind of get doing this. And
I like that.
And again, I'm going to keep getting my fan brush, the rake, going in it. So And so I'm just gonna kind of do it a little bit more here. Now, here on this side, I've got this right up here. I've got this hole, but it doesn't really have the streaking effect that I want. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to hold it vertically and go across that to kind of force it to streak. And then I'll come back and rake it, and that'll drag that streak down in a little bit more of a even pattern, make it look more like it's streaked. Okay, so at this point in time, we kind of have this done. And you guys can kind of see that. So that's one way of doing it. Now, there is another technique that I didn't discuss that I probably should have discussed here up front. And that is, if you take a sign and you want to kind of get it to look a little bit more worn or shot, what you can do is take a little bit of sandpaper. And so I've got a piece of sandpaper here. This one's 150 grit. And on the face of the sign, what you would do, I'll use this sign here, is come down and kind of scrape it. And then if I go through and cut this thing out fairly quickly, bear with me a second here, gentlemen, and I'll try to weather this real quick for you and show you the difference of effects. Greg, I'm just going to freehand this. I know what you're talking about, but I know everybody can see my bald head, so
I
sorry,
didn't say
guys.
nothing.
It's called freehanding. Bear with me. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is part of doing something on the fly and learning when you're doing something live like this. You kind of get to experience all the things that normally would get edited out.
Like your head.
Like my head.
See what you're doing, Chris.
I'm glad you guys are getting a kick out of this. Hey, it provides some entertainment. And somebody wanted to say something. Go on ahead.
I think one of the things that I've been using for the last year are Mig Oil Brushers, which I've used oil paints in the past, but not on the tiny level that I do with those. And I use those for rusting on other products. And I'll show one here. They're basically oil paint in a little brush delivery system. And I'll apply it and then use a tiny, like a 4-aught brush to streak it. But I hadn't thought of using a fan brush like that, and I like those results.
Yeah, and those MIGs, now I have not used the oil brushers, but it's my understanding that they're thinned too with some sort of a solvent so that they flow a little bit better. And I think they've got some sort of a binder added to them too. They're not just oil paints in a little tube, guys, with a brush. They're actually really designed to work well. And the military guys really love them, quite frankly. So I haven't seen much use of them, however, by the fantasy painters.
You had a reaction on YouTube there. They want to know if that's a natural brush fiber or what is it?
On my
Fan.
fan brush, it is a synthetic. And these come as a set from Micro Mart. I don't know, I've forgotten the cost. I've had them for years, but these are the micro ones. The larger fan brushes, which I use a lot of, quite frankly, they are artist brush. They're from the Silver White series. I want to say Gumbacher, and I don't think that's right, manufactures them, but it's the Silver White, and this also is a white synthetic. So because I do a lot of work with acrylics, I tend to use synthetics over naturals. I haven't really found a super big reason for having natural brushes. I do have a few of them, but quite frankly, it's hard for me to go out and spend $60-70 on a high quality Kolinsky type of red sable brush, you know, when I can get, for our purposes, the same quality work out of it that I can with a synthetic. We just don't live with our paintbrushes as much as a professional artist does. And so I don't think that, from my perspective, that really going to high end or using a lot of natural brushes is advantageous. I do have a couple of them, but you know, I would say that the biggest ones that I use that I would recommend is the boar's hair, because you know, that's got a real stiff type of thing to it that you're going to want. And it's good to have a couple smaller natural brushes if you're doing figure painting and things, but you don't have to spend the money to get a super high-end one. You know, just a reasonable quality. But you will have to play with it to understand the differences between brushes and brush types and synthetics versus naturals. And it really, bottom line, comes down to what you are most comfortable with. That's my opinion. So for whatever it's worth. Okay, so real quick, like here, I've gone through and I've scratched this puppy up. Hopefully you can see the scratches here. So now, if I take my gouache, and this time I'm going to use a burnt sienna. Last time I used the burnt umber. So you can look at the tubes and see the differences of the colors. The color down here is about as close as the manufacturer can get it to print. So, and I'm just going to take this again, and I'm going to apply some with my toothpick, and here I'm going across the top. And this is one way to kind of get your edges to color and paint. And then I'm going to go through and just add a couple of busting streaks. Okay, and as usual, I've used a whole ton of gouache. So in that tube. And I'm not going to go through trying to add in the watercolor, but I am going to bring back my water. And I'm just using a sponge here, guys, because it kind of gives me kind of that dry brush, but it's not a dry brush. And I'm going to hold this down here. And now you can kind of see what I get if I do the painting. Whoops. Won't be bold. Okay, and if we let that one kind of dry for a few moments, you will kind of see what's going on. And then if I take just a bit of chalk, pastel, you always hear me tell you, don't do this with your good brushes. So this is what I consider a shot fan. So, and I'm just gonna come down a little bit with some pastel while it's still quasi damp. Excuse me. And we didn't quite get our edge, so I'm gonna come back with a marker real quick and just do the edge. I didn't quite get it. Usually I get a little bit better than what I did, so I did not attempt to get the edges, so or the on the sides and the bottom, so I'm just going on ahead and coloring that. Because I did it cut out freehand, I've got a ragtag piece there, but and if you noticed, I did those real quick strokes, so that way I avoided the bleeding. So the bottom line is, if I can find where I'm at, you can kind of, come on here, see that you get a little bit of a different rusting pattern and a little bit different
Right there, Chris.
than you would get with a regular sign like this one. And if we compare this sign to our original sign set, it may help you really understand the overall effects here that we achieved. I'm sorry, I put away my signs off the second sheet, so
I really like the effect that gouache has.
so you can see the effect that we started with versus what we ended up with.
Chris,
Yes.
what'd you call that again? Gouache?
Gouache.
Oh yeah.
Gouache.
I like the effect that has.
So yeah, it works real well. It's just a different material, a different medium. than what we typically use. We typically just reach for paints, and gouache is a paint. It's just, you need to think about what your materials are. And when you're weathering signs, it's just like all weathering. You need to consider, are you trying to make something opaque, or are you trying to make something translucent? Or are you trying to blend the two things together? And that's where you need to really consider what it is that you're using to do your weathering process, and to make your weathering come out the way you want it to appear. Let's see here. One of the things that we needed to do is run the ad for the O and S Scale Resource Magazine. And Will, I don't know if you've got that handy or not. And people, I'll tell you that I did not warn Will about this in our pre-show meeting, so I forgot.
I've got it, and I'll just have to find it, and I'll put it up right away.
Okay. And so while Will is frantically searching and pulling out hair because of my fupa, how about some other comments? Here we go, guys.
Welcome to the world of scale, O and S railroading. We are your resource for all O and S scale modeling. Both our magazines are advertiser supported and free to read online, download as a PDF, or even print. All advertisers are hot linked to their website, so if you see something you like, just click. Please check out our websites for the current issues. All back issues available free for the O Scale Resource and the S Scale Resource magazines. And, if you are a manufacturer, distributor, or retail establishment, please contact us through our website for advertising opportunities.
Thank you, Will. Where are we time-wise?
Just
10
10 minutes
after
past the
2.
hour.
Okay, so I'm about an hour, 10 minutes into this thing, so about 70 minutes, so we can start kind of winding it down for today. One of the other things that I had mentioned, and maybe Greg can share a little bit of insight on this, and Will, if you can highlight my desktop. I had noted when I was adding window castings or glazing to the windows that I use an opaque product. And I got this from the sign company, a local sign company, and it was just in their trash, but it was something off of the back of a sign, kind of a like a stick and peel, probably vinyl sign, I'm guessing, but it's not really clear, but it's like a frosted acetate, basically. Greg, do you have any clue?
I was just going to say, what you have there is frosted acetate.
Okay, did they just use that on the back of vinyl signs or what?
It's used for a number of things. At work, we used to get a variety of different acetates, usually for program covers and stuff. They'd be 3-hole punch or GBC bound to put on the top of stuff. Usually it was clear, but sometimes people would specify frosted, and it comes in different thicknesses. Now that looks like it had been off of something, a 3M product.
Yeah. Yeah, it had some sort of like paper vinyl on the front of it, and I ended up peeling it off because it was like, you can see some of the cut lines like in this. You can't see it, but I can see some outlines here of like, I don't know, letters or something.
Now, I've got a big envelope of acetate that I brought home from work when I retired, before I retired.
Yeah.
And I'll often just, if it depends on what windows I'm doing, you know, tissue windows often come with their own cut acetate. And if I want to get them flush inside the window frames, I'll often use it because it's already cut to size. But being laser cut, it has burnt edges around it, which gives it an old and dirty look. And if that's what you're going for, that's fine. If you want it to look newer and have clear windows, you're more likely going to need to cut your own out of clear acetate. But very often I'll take my sheet of acetate and just spray it with dull coat, a very light coating, if I have to cut my own windows out, and then use that, because they do give the impression of dirty windows. And many of the buildings that I end up building are old and weathered, and dirty windows are very appropriate for it.
Okay, yeah, I was just noticing here, it does have a 3M, and it says Scotch Cow marking film. If that tells you anything.
Haven't heard of that.
So, but anyway, yeah, the dull coat trick I've used. And the other thing with the dull coat, if you spray it on and while it's still wet, take a Q-tip and rub the Q-tip around it, you can make it look like somebody's wiped down, like with their hand, a little circle.
And I have one kit where I actually put clear glazing in 2 of the windows while the rest of them were dirty. And I didn't see it until after I was near finishing it up. So what I did, I just really watered down some brown paint and came in and dabbed it on the outside of the windows, and they just looked dirty. You know, once it dried, it gave a very, very thin coating of the brown to it, which just makes them look very dirty.
Uh-huh. So, okay, cool. Well, I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit of a look, but that's kind of the porcelain sign things. Now, the next step on this for me, and I would be doing it off camera, is one of 2 things. Either coming through with a spray varnish and putting a coat of spray varnish on it, a high gloss type of thing, or I would use Mod Podge. And both of those will make the sign much more reflective and give you that other reflective effect that a lot of people neglect to get. But by using the gloss paper a little bit, you may or may not, depends on the materials that you used and the amount of weathering that you did, still have some gloss effect. There's a few other techniques that we can discuss that quite frankly are more advanced techniques. And I will be discussing those techniques when we get down to the more advanced weathering techniques in 3 or 4 builds on signs and things to actually make them look a little bit different. Let's see here, hang on one second.
I wonder why this won't go into focus. Must be the background.
And where we're headed with the signs is something like that. And to kind of do it. But the big point is to use a combination of techniques. Quite frankly, these signs were all done using, and part of them, quite frankly, came this way. This is a Sierra West scale models kit, and Brett had already pre-weathered the signs for you, but I did do some additional work on them. And I used the techniques that Greg has presented with the sponging, as well as a couple of other techniques. But like these have the Mod Podge on them. But one of the things I wanted to show here again is right here is a prime example of, you can see the edge, but there's an edge that I did not get covered. And that's why you want to color those edges, because they will stand out and come back and bite you later on. So, but you can see that these are more reflective because they do have the Mod Podge on them.
Chris,
So,
for the glossy paper that you use, do you just use photo print paper, glossy photo paper?
yes. All right, and I'm gonna move this aside, and I'm gonna bring my camera back down here, and we can go back to the computer, Will. And gentlemen, comments, questions, thoughts, anything coming through on YouTube land?
Looking at your buildings and Chris's buildings reminded me, or Greg's buildings, reminded me of a sign that is so common that is seldomly modeled. And that's the porcelain thermometers that are hung outside.
Oh, yeah.
You hardly ever see them modeled on a building. I'll bet you if you look at your buildings, you'll probably have less than 3 or 4 than you will have a thermometer on them.
You're absolutely right. And that's a real good thought. And also last week, Paul Egri brought up another sign, that we totally missed. And I don't know how we did, but that was the canvas sign. You know, and I don't know how one would make those. I kind of thought about it a little bit, and I thought, well, maybe you could do it with some textured paper and print out your sign, and then maybe use something like a diluted white glue or PVA glue, and put the bends in it if you wanted it to bend and kind of fold and stuff. I don't know. Maybe Neil has done something like that. He's one that's done a lot of sign work.
Printing out your sign on a tea bag that you've taped to a sheet of 8.5 by 11. Give you a very good textured sign effect.
Yeah, and that sounds similar to what I did. I took that kind of tissue paper that you can get for putting in present boxes and stuff, and it comes in all different colors. I had a white sheet of that, and I taped it onto a sheet of 8.5 bond and printed my sign on that. Now, I'd use that for a painted on sign, but I could see how you could put the texture in that by using some Mod Podge or white glue or something and have it look like a draped canvas sign.
Okay. Neil, have you got any comments, thoughts, suggestions?
Well, I wanted to ask you a question first. When you just showed the building and the windows, I saw little white dots on the window. Is that something you're going to explain as we go on with the weathering? Could you show it again?
Which structure was it?
The one the last one that you did. There's like a modeled effect of something white on the actual window, not the frame, but the acetate.
Hang on one second. Was this the structure that?
It's the one with the signs on it. Yeah, that's it. That's the end there.
Okay. And
The window is divided. The top looked like there's shades behind it. And
yes,
halfway down, it looks like there is no shade, but there's like a mottled effect on there that I've never seen before. How did you do that? Or are my eyes too good? I don't know.
yeah, really. No, I compliment you on picking that up. Actually, this was done with a stippling technique and God, what did I use? It was a stiff brush, and I can't recall the exact brush. And I used a diluted cream colored watercolor paint. And I let the acetate dry flat. Actually, I had the acetate mounted in the windows when I did it. And then I mounted them.
Yeah, that's a great effect. It really makes it look old.
So
Old and
yeah,
dirty. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it was, yeah, it did take a little bit of work to do, but anyway. Excellent eyes. Didn't expect that to show up, but that's one of those more advanced techniques that we will discuss later. The trick is for me to try to remember all of these things.
You know, there's another treatment that you can do, and it's probably more on the more modern buildings, maybe after the 1950s. But you take a piece of acetate, you put white paint on it on one side. Then you take a toothpick, and then you can write in the acetate for rent, call, and then put a phone number underneath. So when you then turn it around, it's like a building in the 50s or the 60s that somebody, the landlord, wanted to rent out a store or a whole apartment or a storefront. So it's like, I guess what they used to do is put Simon eyes on it or some kind of paste, and then just with their finger or something, scratch it in, and then you turn it around, and it's like, it's an ad.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
It's
good.
very easy to do.
Yeah, there's a thought of something we don't typically see or model. Let's see here. Who else have we got here that Fred, have you got any thoughts? You've been awful quiet today.
I'm absorbing all this information in. Some
Okay.
really good information there.
All right.
Very talented. So keep up the good work.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay.
Chris, we have a new member there. It's Mr. T. Farrell, 60.
T. Farrell, 60. Oh, okay.
He had a building he was trying to show, and apparently his camera wasn't picking it up.
How you doing?
Okay, and well, let's go over there, and apparently I missed it, so Will, we can.
Want me to spotlight him?
Yes, please.
There we go.
Okay, there you go.
How you doing?
Okay, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch your first name?
Tom.
Tom, okay. Oh, okay, Tom, okay. All right.
I'm a, I do a lot of modeling, Here's what I'm working on while you're doing your show. I don't know why the hell the camera doesn't pick it up.
There it is, right there.
Go.
It's in, why the hell is it doing? It's probably.
It's okay.
It's okay. Yeah.
So
Well, that's cool.
I do a lot of modeling that you may know. I don't know if you've seen my work or not.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on.
Turn off your background, virtual background.
And you're gonna see my messy temporary office, but okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Hold on a minute.
Price one pays.
would
scale
not
is that?
shop as nice
Yeah.
as this is. I mean, you got a finished room there. I'm in a cave basement.
A
Yeah.
whole lot of it. If I
Now,
can-
I might bring up that Tom, this is the first time I've seen him, but Tom is actually putting together some presentations to present on down the road here. And we're going to try to work Tom in a little bit more often. So this is one of the things that we've been bringing in, and Tom does, I guess, strictly scratch building across the board. So one of the first things Tom's going to be bringing up here, and I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we decided on
There you go.
21st.
Beautiful.
Yeah. He's
Look
gonna.
at the signs.
Yeah, look at those signs. He's gonna be presenting jigs and fixtures and things. So, you know, and that's one of the first things he's gonna be working on. I'm also, Rich does not know this is coming, but next week I'm gonna ask Rich to step in with some of his sign applications, because Rich is a very unique in the way he uses his signage. Wow.
Oh, look at the signs on there. Whoa.
Hey, Tom, is that a O-scale model?
Yeah. There you go.
Wow.
Very nice.
Yeah, really. Yeah. For
This is
sure.
my,
You
pardon me?
got the magic touch.
It's my temporary apartment. Monday, we move into our house. We had to stay here for a year. Wow.
Got the house built. So did you get a railroad layout room with a house built over it or attached to it?
Correct. It's a 35 by 14 train room, bonus room.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
So these signs, by the way, I sanded the back of them. I printed them out in PowerPoint on paper. And then I printed them out. And then I put Elmer's glue diluted. Then they look like they're painted on. See how they conform to the siding?
Yeah.
Right.
They look like
Yeah,
those two look like they're painted on. And then these ones are they're getting whited out here. They're actually weathered, you know.
okay.
And,
Yeah, because that application process using the diluted PVA glue or white glues and things like that is something that we're going to be discussing next week. Now
there's one of your metal signs there.
yeah, this one right here, the edges, if you'll notice on the
Carnegie steel. Yeah.
yeah, notice, folks, the edges here, all the way around, and how he did that. There's about 3 or 4 different techniques that I'm aware of to kind of blend the signs in when they're like painted on. And this really brings it out because it's so pronounced. But one of my questions pre-show, and this goes to the more advanced guys, and you can kind of think about this for next week. But when you do those painted on signs, be they paper or something else, yeah, you've got to cover the edges, you know, that paper edge.
Yeah.
And are you using a wash or are you using a solid paint?
I use
Or
a
are you-
I used a wash. This it's
Okay,
I use this
Okay.
a lot.
yeah, or are you using a tint?
I use a wash and a paint. So I'll use a wash first, and then I'll use just a Vallejo paint normally.
Okay, so, yeah, and so that's going to give you different effects. And going back into the discussion about materials and considering the materials, remember that a paint's going to be more opaque and more solid.
Yeah.
A wash is going to be a fluid. It's basically a thinned paint, and it's going to give you a more of a a stronger hues and values only in given areas, like in deep folds or something like that. And when you apply it, it typically is applied so that you get a pooling effect. A tint, which is a diluted wash, is applied so that it's not pooling. The effect there that you're after is to give the entire model a different value and color, much like holding up a colored piece of cellophane, like a yellow or a green or a red cellophane in front of it. So the application process, you do not want any pooling in it because you're looking for a smooth, just a overall color value change. So that's the difference between, or the basic differences between a paint, a wash, a shadow, and a tint. So yeah, those are great. So and we're going to be having Tom show some of his scratch building techniques and everything else more on a little bit more regular basis here as we move forward. So, but those are wonderful models, and thank you for the introduction here. That's great.
Yeah, this all my models are in this little room here till I get my train going.
Yeah.
Train
Yeah.
room.
We understand. We're looking forward to it. So anyway, again, if there's anybody out there that would be interested in helping us out on the back side of this show, please feel free to let Jim Kello or myself know. I again want to thank all of the folks who have participated in making sure that this show runs. Rich Wolfinger, who's been monitoring the YouTube guys. And then I've got Will, who is over in France, who's been running the show, and Pat Rivard, who's been helping out. And I think Ken's probably been on the YouTube side and on his phone, kind of watching out for us too. He also made some quick adjustments to the YouTube page to hopefully get those guys on. And
Hey, Chris, I need to butt in here.
Go for it.
Okay, we got on YouTube Ralph Renzetti.
Good old Ralph. Okay, hi Ralph.
He says he has a method that does not require sanding and possibly sanding through. Check out my video on NMRAX on weathered signs.
Okay, great. So that'll be up in the chat and stuff. So all of us that are here on the Zoom, if we didn't catch that, maybe we can go out and snag it off of the chat and do it. Rich, I don't know if you have the ability to type that in or not on the Zoom call in the chat, but if you don't,
I will
we'll
try
pick it up. If not, I will snag it out of the show notes and we'll get it posted on the website, a link to it. And thank you, Ralph, because I know that you're an outstanding modeler also. I've got to somehow convince you to join us on the Zoom. Anyway, all right. Well, with that, I think I'm going to go on ahead and kind of wrap up this show. Again, I wanted to thank everybody for their time and make sure to keep drinking that soda, that coffee, or whatever you're drinking, and keep that modeling process going. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week. And again, thank you, Greg, for joining us. And I didn't catch if that was root beer or not, Greg, but anyway.
Grapefruit sparkling water.
Oh, okay. That works. That works. Yeah. So, but again, thank you everybody for participating, and we'll go on ahead and cut off the live YouTube feed here and the a live recording of the Zoom, and we'll do just a couple of minute brief wrap up on the backside on the Zoom call for those that wanted to stick around.